Hello, everybody. Welcome to the community kickoff meeting for the city plan to end homelessness, which is led by our community development department and our housing division. And we want to thank everyone for joining today to talk about this really important subject. So we have a great presentation for you today, but before we get started on that, I do want to introduce our team. So my name is Gabriel Borden, and I'm a senior housing planner with the city in our housing division. And also in attendance from our housing division is our housing manager, Carrie Husler. We also have our wonderful video team working in the background. And then we have our team from Homebase. So we have Sasha Kane, who will be presenting today, along with Mark Mora, who will be presenting today. And then we also have Jesse Hewins and Nicole Thomas, who are from our Homebase team. So with those introductions done, I will go ahead and hand this off to Sasha to begin the presentation. Thanks, Sasha.
Thank you, Gabe, for that warm welcome. And thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight. We are super excited to have you here to talk about the City of Cupertino plan to end homelessness and to formally kick off the city planning process. We are excited not just to tell you about what we have in store and what will be in the plan and who will be talking to flesh out the strategies to end homelessness in the city of Cupertino. We also are looking forward to getting your input, your questions about this process and about homelessness in Cupertino, and your ideas about what should be in the plan, the priorities that you have in mind for the community. So thank you again for joining us to learn more about the city plan to end homelessness, and we are excited to chat with you. We do want to note that there are folks, there's a number of folks here that have lived experience of homelessness, and we really appreciate your time and your insights, and we are looking forward to creating a safe space for everyone to contribute today. So what do we have in store for this meeting? We are going to go over some logistics real quick, and Gabe already did introductions. So we are then going to dive into some regional context for this process. So we'll touch briefly on the Santa Clara County plan to end homelessness, and we'll talk about the process of developing the Cupertino City Plan to end homelessness and what you should expect to see in that plan. After that, we'll step back a little bit and we'll talk about homelessness in Cupertino. We'll talk about some trends over the past decade, and we'll really dig into causes of homelessness in the city, in the county, and in the Bay Area region, because this is truly a regional issue. Finally, we've left some time for Q&A. We'll talk about how to submit your questions in just a minute, but we'll do some questions throughout the presentation, and we'll also have time at the end. As I mentioned, we are very excited to hear from you. So we've prepared some questions for for all of our participants today. There will be several opportunities throughout the presentation. I know right now it looks like we have about 80 people here today. So we are excited to hear about your ideas. And the reason that we've gathered in this virtual space is we want to hear from you. So we want you to get a chance to ask us questions and to share your thoughts. We're also well aware that this is evening time and often a downtime for folks. So be sure to take breaks and stretch and do whatever you need to take care of your human needs throughout this meeting. So how can folks that are here on Zoom today interact with us? If you have a question during today's presentation, or if you have a comment, you'll see there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please hit that button and use the Q&A feature to share your questions and your comments throughout the presentation. We have lots of people here today. Folks are still trickling in. I'm seeing that number go up. So we're excited to take all of your questions. We have, as Gabe mentioned, a team of folks here to do our best to answer as many questions as we can live through the Q&A, or certainly to the extent we have time, some of them out loud. We do want to note that if there are some questions that we don't get to, don't worry, we are bookmarking them, and we will be sure to address any that we don't get to during the meeting afterwards. So we'll be picking questions at random so as not to prioritize the fastest typers in our Zoom room today. So everyone has the same chance of getting their questions answered. So you don't need to worry about scrambling to get your questions in. Just type them into the Q&A feature when they come to you, and we'll either address them in the Q&A or out loud, or if we don't have a chance to, we'll follow up about them after today's session. You'll also note there's another button at the bottom of your screen that says Live Transcript. This is how you can access closed captions for the meeting today. So you can always turn those on or off through the Live Transcript button. There's a few other viewing options besides Zoom. There's a variety of ways that you can watch this workshop. It is being recorded, and it will be available to watch on the City Plan to End Homelessness website. It'll be available in a couple days, and it's also you can also view at cupertino.org/YouTube, at cupertino.org/TV. And folks can also tune in on a local TV channel, which would be channel 26 on Comcast or channel 99 if you have AT&T. Finally, if none of those options work for you, folks are very welcome to call in through their phones. So that phone number to call in and listen is 669-900-6833. And you'll be prompted to enter a webinar ID. So that's 991-5503-2688. You won't be able to view any of our materials, obviously, but if you have to be on the run, you can still tune in and listen to the session. We wanted to start today by acknowledging that there are a lot of folks here today with us who may be experiencing homelessness themselves, or other Cupertino residents who maybe have someone unhoused in mind that they would like to help out. So we wanted to share a couple of resources with folks today. If you are in need of assistance, or if there's someone in your neighborhood that you'd like to help out, there's an emergency shelter and community resource hotline that's called the Here For You hotline. And so we encourage folks to reach out to that hotline at 408-385-2400. And it's always good idea to let the city know to make sure that the proper agencies are aware of the situation and can support the person in need. So we also encourage you to call 311. Great. So there are a variety of efforts that are already underway in the city of Cupertino to address housing and homelessness issues. And we'll touch about the various partners and initiatives in just a minute. But one thing that I really want to highlight is that there's a parallel community process that's underway right now, and that's the housing element update. The housing element update is specifically focused on the housing needed in a community. So the housing that Cupertino, the city of Cupertino needs. Today, we are focusing on a narrower piece of that. So we're focusing on the homelessness aspect. So the city's efforts to address homelessness, including the city plan that we're talking about today, will inform the broader housing element update process. So we do encourage folks to get involved not only in the city plan to end homelessness, but we're really hoping that folks will get involved in the housing element update as well. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please go to engagecupertino.org/housing element. At this point, I am going to pass it to my colleague Mark to talk about the county contest and the county plan to end homelessness.
Thank you, Sasha. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Mora, and I'm on the Homebase team supporting this important work. I'm glad to be with you all tonight and to be addressing such a large group. At the least, that means that there's great energy and interest in ending homelessness in Cupertino, which is certainly exciting and worth celebrating. I'm going to start off by talking not about the Cupertino City Plan, but instead about the county plan, which is called the Santa Clara County Community Plan to End Homelessness, but I'll refer to it as the county plan for short. One reason we're talking about the county plan is to highlight that homelessness, much like any community issue, and perhaps more than most, is not something that can easily be confined or resolved just within city boundaries. Things that Cupertino or any city does or doesn't do to reduce homelessness has impacts on the cities around it and the entire region. Also, it's important for any local plan to be mindful of and complement the larger regional plan so that resources are coordinated and impact is maximized. So in short, if we want to end homelessness in Cupertino, we can't close ourselves off from what's happening in the larger region. It's all connected because we're all connected. Now to the county plan, in 2019, the County of Santa Clara Office of Supportive Housing and a variety of other partners embarked on a strategic planning process culminating in the 2020 to 2025 community plan to end homelessness. Before this 2020 to 2025 plan, there was a 2015 to 2019 plan. And while a lot of progress was made toward reducing homelessness, there is still an extreme lack of affordable housing for low-income residents in the county. So definitely more work needs to be done. And so these are the 3 key strategies in the plan. Quick note before I talk about those key strategies. The 2020 to 2025 plan was launched in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has made these strategies all the more urgent, but has also resulted in significant new resources coming into the community and an increased level of coordination among the many partners addressing homelessness across the county. So there are 3 strategies in the county plan. Strategy 1 recognizes that in order to end homelessness, we have to address the root causes, which requires systemic policy change. This strategy looks at widening access to safety net services, addressing the revolving door between homelessness and the criminal legal system, identifying underutilized land to develop affordable housing, strengthening rent control and local tenant protections, and concerted efforts around access to living wage employment. Strategy 2 is really about building the capacity of what is referred to as the supportive housing system to provide a broad array of housing and services. For those that may not be as familiar, the supportive housing system refers to all of the county partners, government, healthcare, nonprofit, faith-based organizations, et cetera, that provide housing and services to people experiencing homelessness. It can be things like emergency shelter, prevention programs, rental assistance, food programs. So one of the goals under strategy 2 is to expand the system to serve 2,500 people per year, with the 2019 baseline being 1,000 households, and to ultimately house 20,000 people over 5 years. So big, bold goal. Other sub-strategies include centering the voices of people with lived experience of homelessness in policy and programmatic design, and also incentivizing the hiring of people with lived experience. Strategy 3 is less about meeting system needs and more about prioritizing human needs and responding in real time. This looks like increasing street outreach and hygiene services, increasing mental health and substance abuse services, and doubling temporary housing that's available. Next slide, please. Which brings us to the purpose of the community meeting today, the Cupertino City Plan to End Homelessness. Next slide. So just a brief history. On December 15th, 2020, this Cupertino City Council was the first city in the county to formally endorse the 2020 to 2025 Santa Clara County Community Plan to End Homelessness. To implement this countywide framework in Cupertino, the Cupertino City Council added the Cupertino Plan to End Homelessness to the 2021 to 2022 work program. And the work program is basically, it guides some of the major efforts of the city for the upcoming fiscal year. So, quick intro on the city plan to end homelessness. What is it? It's a community-wide roadmap to ending homelessness. Why is it important? It's a document to guide the city, nonprofits, and other community members as they make decisions about funding, programs, priorities, and needs. Next slide. The plan will cover who is experiencing homelessness and why, so i.e. diagnosing root causes of homelessness in Cupertino, what evidence-based strategies and innovative approaches we must pursue, essentially what path or set of strategies should we take, and then what targets must we achieve to bring us to our goal. So that's about measuring and tracking success. Here's a timeline of the community planning process. In fall of 2021, the city launched the process and released a request for proposals. They selected our organization, Homebase, to guide the city and develop the city plan. In winter, which is where we are today, we are currently gathering community input on the plan, this meeting being one example of that. Then in spring, we're going to take all of the input and data that was collected and draft the plan. Then in summer, first the draft plan will go to this Housing Commission for review, input, and ultimately they will recommend a version of the plan to City Council for their review and input, and ultimately their approval. Just want to highlight that throughout the process, there are opportunities for public input. So we are currently in the process of collecting feedback for the plan from stakeholders in the community in a variety of ways, including the following. So there's community-wide meetings that includes this meeting. We're going to be talking to key stakeholders and interviewing them. That is individuals who are positioned to have a lot of insight on homelessness in Cupertino. And then we're also going to be doing focus groups, which are basically discussions with small groups of people who have stake on the issue of homelessness. For instance, persons who have lived experience of homelessness, housing and services providers, healthcare providers, et cetera. And also there is, once the plan is drafted, there will be a public comment period where you can review the plan and provide input. All of this to say that community engagement is critical to ensuring there is diverse feedback, community buy-in, and that the plan really reflects what is happening in Cupertino and what needs to happen to effectively reduce homelessness. So let's get a little more specific about how residents can inform the process. You can certainly share your ideas today. We have some questions for you, and we'll ask you to use the Q&A function on your Zoom toolbar to respond. And then you can, by providing your comments on the draft plan during the public comment period, the draft plan will be available on the City Plan to End Homelessness website, and notice will be distributed through the city's newsletter and social media. And you can sign up to receive email updates on the City Plan to End Homelessness website to make sure you don't miss out on any of these opportunities. And we want to ask a question now for you all to respond to. So if you're on Zoom, you can respond by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom window. The question is, in your opinion, what programs or services are most needed to support persons experiencing homelessness in Cupertino? So I'll give you a couple moments. Again, you can click on the button that says Q&A, should be at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then you can type in your responses there. Again, the question is, in your opinion, what programs or services are most needed to support persons experiencing homelessness in Cupertino? And I'll read a couple out loud. I see access to plentiful, affordable housing. Thank you for your comment. Temporary shelter for unhoused residents, definitely important. Services that address human needs. Food, personal health, housing support. I see a lot of comments about housing, different types of services. I see mental health, substance abuse assessments, referrals. Thank you all, keep the comments coming. I see guaranteed incomes, certainly been done in different communities. Transitional housing / pallet shelter. Job training. All right, I see a ton of comments. We won't be able to get to all of them, but just note that all of your comments that you're submitting, we have them on record. So apologies if I wasn't able to read your comments aloud. We're also gonna pause here to answer some questions that may have popped up in the Q&A. Gonna pass it over to my colleague, Jesse, to see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, we've gotten a few questions in the chat. One question I wanted to pose to you and Sasha was, some folks wanted some more information about the county community plan and who was involved in that and how that kind of came to be.
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. The county plan was really a collaboration, a community-wide collaboration. There was obviously a few county departments involved, but also the city of San Jose, Destination Home, the city of Morgan Hill and Mountain View. And as we mentioned, the city of Cupertino is the first to develop an aligned city plan. So definitely much support from everyone's backyards here, but also so many community organizations like Sacred Heart and Community Solutions and Abode Services and several lived experience advisory boards. So there were the COC level advisory board, Sacred Hearts advisory board, Home Firsts, Bill Wilson centers, several dozen nonprofits in the community, and of course, Santa Clara County residents themselves. So it was really a community-wide effort to develop this plan.
Great, thanks, Sasha. That's all the open questions we have right now.
Awesome, thank you, Jesse. And thank you everyone for, I see that some folks are still popping in their answers in the chat or in the Q&A, we appreciate it. But we'll keep moving with the presentation. So next, I wanna talk about homelessness in Cupertino specifically. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is data about homeless individuals in Cupertino. A couple things before I talk about the graphic. I want to stress that even though I'm sharing numbers, I want to remind everyone that these numbers represent people in this community, our neighbors, each of which have their story, and some of these neighbors are even in this meeting tonight. Also, every 2 years at the end of January, communities across the country conduct comprehensive counts of the local homeless populations in order to measure the prevalence of homelessness in each region. Due to COVID concerns, the 2021 count was postponed, and the next count is scheduled to take place at the end of this month. So that's why the latest data here is from 2019. Another thing is that for purposes of these counts, communities use the definition of homelessness from the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, HUD. This definition includes individuals and families living in emergency shelters, as well as those living in places not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, including a car, park, abandoned building, bus or train station, airport, or camping ground. People who are double, tripled up, or couch surfing are not included in the count. So now as for the graphic here, according to the Santa Clara County Homeless Census and Survey, there were 159 persons experiencing homelessness in the city of Cupertino in January 2019, which is a 25% increase from 2017 and the highest number in over a decade. In terms of trend, you can see that despite a few dips, the number of homeless individuals has been on the rise for the past decade. Next slide, please. Zooming out a little bit now to look at some county data. Again, keeping in mind that homelessness is a regional issue. The Santa Clara County Homeless Census and Survey found a total of a little over 9,700 persons experiencing homelessness in January 2019, a 31% increase from 2017, which is also the highest number that has been seen in over a decade. Key takeaway here is that the trend we saw in the city, as far as homelessness increasing over the past decade, is true in the county as well. You know what? It's also true in the Bay Area. So these are trends we're seeing across the board. This visual shows the place of residence of folks prior to becoming homeless. So again, I'll repeat that. This shows the place of residence of folks prior to becoming homeless. The key takeaway here is that the vast majority, 81% of people experiencing homelessness in Santa Clara County became homeless while they were already residing in our county. We know that the high cost of housing, the slow recovery from the Great Recession, changes in the types of jobs available in our community, and COVID impacts have all played a role in the high level of homelessness in Santa Clara County. Now we have another question for you all to respond to. The question is, what are some ways to improve the quality of life for unsheltered individuals? So again, you would use the Q&A function in your Zoom window. What are some ways to improve the quality of life for unsheltered individuals? Unsheltered meaning folks who don't have a roof over their heads. So what are some ways, services, what's missing in the current resources? What have you seen work in other communities? And I'll read some out loud. So I see mobile hygiene stations, access to laundry facilities, provide nutrition or nutritious food, access to showers. That's a good one for sure. Sanitation services. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming. Help them to become self-sufficient. I see a ton of comments about showers, restrooms, laundry. It's kind of personal hygiene services.
I think
Universal
a couple
basic
of folks
income.
had this question in mind earlier already, because I saw at least a few folks mention transportation and how important it is to increase those options.
Thanks for calling that out, Sasha.
I think we saw some call outs.
Oh, please go ahead.
For peer-to-peer supports and for more street outreach also.
Awesome. These are great ideas. Thank you all for sharing your input, and keep them coming. Again, we'll keep these on the record. I also want to pause again to see if we can take any questions at this point. Any questions you're seeing, Jesse?
Yeah, we had a question about the source of some of the data. I think specifically about the pit count data. If you all could talk a little bit about where that data came from.
Sure, be happy to. The point in time count is a requirement of the Housing and Urban Development Department. So every year, or in some cases every other year, communities conduct a massive outreach to identify, to try to count every single person that's experiencing homelessness. So that happens typically towards the end of January. With COVID, some of this, due to safety concerns, the count didn't happen last year. And this year, because of Omicron and the massive wave of cases, it's been delayed to February. So we will very soon have a better sense of how COVID has impacted the city of Cupertino and the county of Santa Clara and the Bay Area more concretely. All of the Bay Area counties are doing their count in February. So their counts are coming up and we'll have data soon. But basically, we're counting folks who are either unsheltered and living in some of the categories that Mark mentioned, like in cars or in parks, in tents, in basically any place not meant for human habitation, and also counting folks who are living in shelter. And so that doesn't include folks who are doubled up or who are couch surfing.
Great, thanks, Sasha. Also, we've got lots of great questions, lots of comments coming in. I also had one that I think for the city, Gabe, I was hoping that you could answer. There's a question about, is the city considering expanding transportation options that would be helpful for folks who are kind of trying to hold down a job and get to that job?
Yeah, I think one thing that question points out is the fact that this is not just a housing division issue, right? This is when it comes to the city plan to end homelessness, this is going to be a wide effort that's going to involve all our departments. It's going to require interdepartmental coordination, and we have a whole bunch of initiatives that are happening in the transportation department. And I think that so in coming up with this plan, it won't just be housers, for instance, that will be providing feedback. It'll also be obviously the folks on the call today, but also our transportation planners and transportation folks that will provide input. So yes, that will be kept in mind during this plan for sure.
Great, thanks. I'll turn it back to Sasha and Mark.
Thanks, Jesse, and thanks for keeping track of all of those questions. I think some of you are anticipating some of the topics that we have in mind. I'm seeing some questions come through about causes of homelessness and what the city of Cupertino is doing to alleviate homelessness. So hopefully the next couple sections answer some of your questions, but again, keep them coming in the Q&A. So we'll start with talking about some of the causes of homelessness, both on the city level, the county level, and the regional level, since they are all intertwined, as are the solutions. This data is again coming from the point in time count. The most recent one was in 2019 in Santa Clara County, and you'll see that the most commonly cited reason that someone fell into homelessness was job loss. And then there are several factors, several challenges and roadblocks that folks were reflecting on that prevented them from regaining housing stability. First and foremost among these was the astronomical cost of rent, followed by a lack of employment, limited housing availability, and a lack of resources to cover moving costs. So what do we mean when we're talking about astronomical costs of rent. I think we have a lot of residents here, so you know full well about what renting and what renting is like in Cupertino. But just to highlight a couple numbers, Cupertino has not been able to dodge the structural issues that affect the larger county housing market. So the median, so that just the middle monthly rent, meaning half the rents are higher than this. The median monthly rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is over $2,500. So again, half of the 1-bedrooms that are in Cupertino are cost more than that. At the same time, nearly half of the population of the city of Cupertino rents. So those two things combined mean that there's a super tight rental market. And that's especially true for low-income households. So for every affordable home, there are actually 14 low-wage workers that need housing. And what that results in is a high population of folks who are cost burdened. So specifically, we have 16% of renters that are severely cost burdened. And that means that they're spending more than half of their household income on housing. So they're spending more than half of their income on rent. We have 18% of renters that are cost burdened, which means they are spending 30 to 50% of income on housing. So that's over a third of renters in the area who are spending a very significant portion of their income on their housing expenses. Zooming out a little bit to look at trends in the Bay Area, as Mark has touched on several times, homelessness is very much a regional issue. And in the Bay Area, in a region where the average household income is approaching $140,000, not to mention where the top 10% earn more than $290,000, there's 500,000 households, that's 16.7% of the population, that are considered extremely low income. These are folks that are trying to make ends meet on an average of just shy of $18,000 a year. So even prior to the pandemic, over around half of extremely low income households in the Bay Area were precariously housed. They were receiving no housing assistance. They didn't own their home outright, and they were paying more than 30% of their income towards rental or mortgage costs. In addition to that, multiple factors, including systemic racism, for example, in the form of redlining, have led to significant disparities in who's actually represented in the extremely low income population and who has been most affected by the structural barriers to housing security and by the COVID-19 pandemic. When we talk about structural barriers to housing security, the things that are most salient in the Bay Area are kind of laid out, summarized very briefly on this slide. First off, we know that housing in the US is not a basic right, and there's just not currently enough federal funding for housing assistance to meet the need. So unlike food stamps, for example, where if you're eligible for food stamps, you're guaranteed to get them. Anyone who's eligible can get food stamps. Housing is not the same. So federal housing assistance is not an entitlement. And in the Bay Area specifically, this is particularly problematic because there are 4 times as many households who are eligible for housing assistance than there are actual vouchers or public housing units. Second, there's just not enough housing being built to meet the region's needs. And especially in the context of income inequality and employment growth, this really contributes to the skyrocketing housing costs. So just to give you some figures, between 2011 and 2017, the Bay Area created over 500,000 new jobs, but approved just over 100,000 new housing units. So that's a ratio of 4.3 jobs for every housing unit, which is far above the recommended ratio. So the entire region is falling behind on housing production. And to add to that, there's also more higher income households that are choosing to rent rather than own. So since 2010, the number of renters in the Bay Area that are making over $150,000 a year has grown by 80%. And these households, they can bid more for the available units. So they place pressure on the rental supply, and they contribute to a rise in rents across the board. In addition to that, we know it's prohibitively expensive. It's super expensive to develop affordable housing in the Bay Area and in California in general. And there's just not enough funding to support building units that are affordable to extremely low income households. So if we're thinking, we're thinking about those households that are making $18,000 a year, they just can't afford new market rate units. The rents that are affordable to someone who's earning 30% of the area median income or below, they're just not enough to cover a landlord's operating expenses. And that means that some sort of subsidy has to either go to the landlord or the tenant to make long-term affordability and quality of the unit feasible. In addition to that, as if that weren't enough, it's not just a housing issue. We know homelessness is an intersectional issue. It's the labor market issue as well. So there's just a huge number of jobs that fail to pay a living wage. So when we talk about living wage, what that means is the bare minimum income that's necessary for someone to meet their basic needs. So there are a ton of low wage and non-standard jobs, and these have expanded since the early 2000s. And so there's limited opportunities for economic mobility. The barriers to wage growth are especially high for people of color, for women, for folks with less formal education, and for folks in low-end service occupations. So all of the characteristics that align with the ELI population. So on top of that, individuals in households at the top end of the income distribution have seen their wages rise. So for folks that are already earning a lot, their wages are going up. Whereas folks that are at the bottom end, their wages have been flat basically since the 70s. And since the Great Recession, we've seen significant job growth. Yes, this is very true. Yet very few of the employment opportunities that we've seen since the Great Recession are actually among middle wage occupations. So job growth has really been concentrated either in the high end of the earnings spectrum or the low wage jobs, which means that the Bay Area continues to struggle with a high rate of low wage workers who just cannot support their families, even if they work full time. And here comes a global pandemic. So the impact of the pandemic has really followed the same patterns of inequity that have affected the housing and labor markets prior to the crisis. So since March 2020, the biggest job losses, the most jobs lost, and the most reductions in hours have fallen to low wage and service sector workers. So the folks that were already, had the lowest paying jobs before the pandemic have been most affected by it. So the jobs in the low paying industries have also been disproportionately held by people of color. And so these jobs have been down more than twice as much between February and December 2020 as any jobs in the medium wage industries, and 4 times as much as jobs in high wage industries. And again, women of color have experienced especially sharp losses. So there's been some improvement in economic conditions since December 2020, when the entire region was affected by the shelter-in-place orders. But nearly 30% of extremely low-income renters were still experiencing income losses due to the pandemic in June of 2021. So that was well after many sectors of the economy in the Bay had reopened. And among extremely low income renters that were affected by COVID related job losses, about 2/3 saw their monthly household income cut in half. So that's like a pretty alarming prospect, given that the majority of those renters were already cost burdened, were already spending 30, 40, 50% of their income on rent, even before the pandemic hit. We know there's been some great work around local, state, and federal eviction moratoria, and that those have really helped to stem the tide of homelessness related to the economic downturn. But as the moratoria lifts, the risk that these households will experience housing instability and or homelessness is high. And 1 in 5 extremely low income renter households report being behind on their rental payments. Even more of those extremely low income households report having unpaid debts to either family, friends, or other types of unpaid dues. And that's more than 3 times the rate of moderate or higher income households. So that kind of paints a picture of all of the structural barriers that are present across the Bay Area that put certain people, that put especially low income and extremely low income households more at risk of housing instability, and that stand in the way of folks regaining stability. So we wanted to pause here to take your thoughts. Another question for y'all about how do we prevent folks from losing their housing and falling into homelessness? So we'll be looking to the Q&A again, so feel free to go send your thoughts in whenever you're ready. We've explored a little bit so far the types of programs that you all want to see when someone is experiencing homelessness. We've talked about improving quality of life for folks who are unsheltered. And now we ask, how do we prevent folks from experiencing that to begin with? I'm seeing a bunch of thoughts come in. Measures to slow down rent increases. Yes, how do we keep the already high rents from skyrocketing even further? Rental assistance and improved policies about eviction. Thank you. Debt forgiveness and coverage. Getting folks connected to living wage employment. Experimenting with basic income. Building a lot more housing in the first place so that folks have options and to keep down the cost of housing. So much comes back to that. Supporting folks with life skills to help them become more resilient. Absolutely. Building more apartments, condos, townhomes. As we've seen, the supply has not kept up with the demand and the rents keep going up. Keep your ideas coming now. Thank you for all of your suggestions. I'm wondering, Jesse, if we have any open questions right now.
Yes, we do. We have lots of questions that have been coming in. We had one question that folks had about living wage employment and whether there was any training or support that helps folks enter into those higher wage jobs.
Is that a question for Gabe or for me?
I can start that one off. So there we have both county and city opportunities now. So stay tuned for the rest of the presentation because that's a great allusion to what's about to come up. We're about to talk later on in the presentation about what Cupertino is doing to help alleviate homelessness and specifically within the city. And one of the new programs we have going on is a job training pilot program that is currently being run by West Valley Community Services. And so this is to help currently 2 homeless residents with living wage work. And so we're pretty proud of this effort. It's going great so far. But the county also has a number of employment pathway initiatives that they are working on. So please continue to provide those types of ideas into the chat as that type of feedback will definitely be included as we consider what we want to continue to invest in the city plan to end homelessness.
Great, thanks, Gabe. We also got another question, and I can help out with this one if we need to, about what percentage of people who are homeless who have jobs, and what percent do not have jobs. And so that was one that was from, we have some data from the Santa Clara County Homeless Census that Sasha and Mark covered in the presentation, but there was some specific data on there. About 56% of those folks surveyed reported they did not have a job or income. So we've got also, I think those are the questions we have for now. I'll turn it back to Sasha and Mark.
Thanks, Jesse. I think a lot of folks have been itching to know what is being done to address homelessness in Cupertino. So we wanted to spend the last bit of this session before we take more Q&A and have one more question for you all to talk about the progress that the city of Cupertino is making to end homelessness. So there's some specific examples of great work that we really want to highlight. There's a city unhoused task force. So there's a group of folks that are coordinating across city departments to really lead the entire city's engagement and response around homelessness. And some of the work that has come out of that is the city is funding a housing and human services grant program. So this program has over $100,000 dedicated to West Valley Community Services care and Haven to Home programs. These 2 programs provided case management and supportive services for 134 clients in the last fiscal year. If you remember Mark's notes earlier about the homeless count in Cupertino, it was 159 in 2019. So in context, West Valley is doing incredible work to support so many clients in the fiscal year. And last fall, the city partnered with West Valley Community Services to launch a pilot job training program that Gabe just touched on. So that has provided housing and jobs for 2 formerly homeless clients in the community. Another thing we'd like to highlight is Abode's efforts around the Wolf Road encampment. So Abode Services assisted 14 individuals from the Cupertino Wolf Road encampment from December 2020 to January 2022 to transition to interim housing or bridge housing with the goal of attaining permanent housing. And 5 of those folks have already moved on to pursue other permanent housing opportunities. It doesn't stop there. The city has been working with De Anza College to provide housing assistance grants and house sharing. So there's a recent survey that De Anza did of their students, and that survey found that 5 out of 10 students are housing insecure and 2 out of 10 are experiencing homelessness. And so the city has partnered with De Anza College to provide cash grants to students who live in Cupertino to help them avoid eviction, to pay move-in costs, so that they're able to continue with their education at De Anza. In addition, Catholic Charities has coordinated a free matching service to help students find affordable housing, to find rented rooms within private homes in the community. Of course, we also want to highlight the West Valley Rotating Safe Park program. So this is a program that's providing safe and welcoming spaces where guests who are living in their cars can sleep and stabilize and recover and gain access to social services. The Safe Park program is a collaboration of 18 partners. So that's the City of Cupertino, the City of Saratoga, 10 faith-based organizations, De Anza College, West Valley Community Services, Amigos de Guadalupe, the Sheriff's Department, and 2 YMCAs. And the safe parking programs are a new approach to the region's rising housing crisis. And unlike traditional shelters, they have relatively low impact on the community because they don't require a permanent infrastructure on site. And it's much more than just a place to park your car and sleep safely. The West Valley Rotating Safe Park program provides a number of services. There's hospitality services like meals and snacks and supplies like blankets and socks and toiletries, and grants to support folks with car repairs and classes and work clothes and gas cards, all sorts of things to help them land on their feet. But also case management and housing support and counseling services. There's advocacy and outreach and shower services and safety checks and support. So it's much more than just a safe place to park. The program really wraps around services. In addition, the City of Cupertino contributed just shy of $5 million to the first Measure A, you might know it as the Affordable Housing Bond, the first Measure A project in Santa Clara County. So getting at, we know we need to build more housing. We know we need to build more affordable housing. And the very first development in the county is in Cupertino. We've mentioned a number of key partners so far. We do want to highlight that there are so many organizations in the community that are working together to provide housing and services to our unhoused neighbors. This slide lists some key partners that are providing supportive services and shelter and prevention services and housing to folks in Cupertino. So there are lots of partners at the table, and now we've come to a big question for the group today. We wanted to spend some time on this question and to have folks think about what the city plan, as we've mentioned, is going to guide us and include strategies that folks have that we've discussed today and that we'll discuss at some of the focus groups and meetings to come. But a big question for y'all today is, what do we as a community, partners need to do to end homelessness in Cupertino? And when we talk about community partners, we have a long list of folks. There's, the more than 20 organizations that I highlighted on the last slide, but also the city. What do you see the role of the city being? What do you want to see from housing developers? What do you want to see from healthcare providers? What do you want to see law enforcement do to support the community in ending homelessness? What's the role of the education sector? What do you see the role of local business playing? What do you see other community organizations doing? I'm seeing a comment too that nonprofits can use more staff to support unhoused residents. It's been to lower folks' caseloads and to provide case management to support folks to regain their housing stability. Someone wants to see a more development across all income levels. We need to reduce the stigma surrounding homelessness and treat folks with respect in addressing their issues. Providing coordinated support and assistance to get folks permanently out of poverty, to keep them out of poverty. Integrating services throughout the education sector to support students to meet their basic needs like laundry and feminine hygiene for students that need that support. Looking into what some other communities in California have done. So what is San Francisco doing? What is LA doing? Facilitating having the education sector facilitate some job training or career coaching. So many ideas coming through. Matching new housing to new jobs, having the housing market, the growth in the housing market pace the growth of the job market. Someone suggested we shouldn't emulate other communities and come up with our own strategies. Very much appreciated. And why we're talking to y'all today and doing focus groups and surveys. We know that the folks that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So we appreciate all of the ideas that y'all are sending through. Healthcare providers, oh, where did that go? Healthcare providers partnering with street outreach teams to provide mobile primary healthcare, meeting folks where they're at to provide healthcare. Thank you. Ensuring that our policies are rooted in human dignity and protection. That is key, being person-centered in all of our approaches, centering the experiences of folks with lived experience of homelessness. Empowering the education sector to connect students with nonprofits that can support them in getting housed so that they have a chance to stay in school and achieve academic success. Appreciate that. Keep them coming, folks. Wondering if we have open questions. I can stop sharing these slides so we can all see each other.
we have one question. There was a question about how do we define Cupertino homeless individuals? If someone moves to Cupertino, should we be providing assistance to them? And Mark, I think you were going to take that one.
Yeah, I can maybe start the response to that, and other folks, if they want to chime in, can do that. So yeah, first, I just want to echo what Sasha and I have said a couple times already throughout the presentation, that homelessness is interconnected as an issue across cities and region. So what Cupertino does or doesn't do in terms of addressing homelessness has impacts on neighboring cities, on the region, and vice versa. What other cities do, what the region does, has impacts on Cupertino. And then secondly, I think at the heart of the question for me personally is, essentially the question is, asking essentially someone, in this case, a neighbor is in need, how will the community, that is their neighbors, respond to that, I think is another point. And lastly, I'll say just, services, opportunities made available in Cupertino. They'll certainly be serving people in Cupertino, but also be made available to people in the region. And that can certainly have impacts as well that need to be accounted and planned for. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
You said it perfectly, Mark.
All right. Another question we had was about how pressing the homelessness issue in Cupertino is compared to other cities in the Bay Area or Santa Clara County.
I'll take that question. I think one thing to keep in mind, as kind of Mark was just echoing, homelessness affects each and every person in an urgent fashion, right? So I think in 2019, our count was 159 homeless folks here in Cupertino. And so for each and every one of those folks, that is an extremely urgent situation, whether it be unsheltered or sheltered. And we know that COVID, based on what Sasha and Mark was saying, has exacerbated the situation. So, and it's by the showing of all of you that have showed up today, we have 104 participants on the line now. That also shows how important and urgent this subject is. So I think it's safe to say that that homelessness in Cupertino and the subject at hand is quite urgent.
Great, thanks for that. If folks want to keep popping their questions in the chat, we've got some more time for question and answer.
I just want to reiterate for folks that are submitting questions, and we have a whole bunch of Q&A coming in. We have a lot of comments coming in. So for folks who may have joined late, it's just keeping in mind that if your question is not answered today for whatever reason, we do have a log of every single comment, every single question that was submitted, and all of it will be we will be looking to all these comments to incorporate into the city plan to end homelessness. And there will be an effort to develop an FAQ of sorts post presentation. So just for folks who hadn't heard that yet, but thank you everyone for participating. This is great participation.
Okay, we've gotten a few more questions. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions, but someone wanted to know how someone can join in this effort to end homelessness. Would volunteering with West Valley Services be a start? Curious if folks on the panel have any thoughts on that, or if folks on the line have suggestions for ways that people can get involved, feel free to pop those in the Q&A too, and we'll share some of those.
Yeah, I think Sasha and Mark had brought up a part of the presentation that kind of has spoken to the efforts that are going to be taken during this community engagement process. So just to remind folks of what those are, we have this meeting going on right now, and this is general community. And then we'll also have, once we've had our focus group sessions that are going to be with very specific communities like providers in the city and the county and the criminal and legal and business and the community. Once we go through those and we have our individual stakeholder interviews, so there's a lot of community engagement there. But once all that is complete, that is all going to be incorporated into our first draft of the city plan to end homelessness. And then once that's done, we'll have a public comment period on top of that. So we won't just be launching this and or launching a plan kind of like behind the scenes with no feedback. We'll have a draft plan and everyone will be able to have place their thoughts in there as well. So that's when it comes to the city plan itself, that's how folks can continue to be involved. In terms of just personal work and what you can do outside of the city plan to end homelessness, I think volunteering with West Valley Community Services is an example of a great option. I don't know if the Homebase team has further comments on that.
All right. I'm seeing some more questions come in the chat. Let's see. There were, a lot of questions about next steps in the process that I think Gabe just covered right now. Some questions about the focus groups that were mentioned. There was also a question about the 2022 point in time count and whether those survey results will be available. I think the answer to that question is those will be available following the count that takes place at the end of the month. So usually those come out sometime over the summer, I think. Let's see if there were any other questions. Sorry, just trying to keep up with all of these.
While you do that, I can talk about the point in time count a little bit. It's, as Jesse mentioned, typically it takes a couple months to get results out. So that's because, as you know, there are thousands of folks in the community who are getting counted or getting surveyed, and then there winds up being certain duplicates. So there's a whole data cleaning and analysis process to develop the reports that the county finally releases to make sure that everyone is counted, but also that no one is counted twice, and that the data that the community presents is as accurate as possible, because the point in time count data does get used for a lot of federal funding applications and to really give context to homelessness in the community in many meetings, in public meetings like this one, and work groups where folks meet to address homelessness. So it's really important that it's the data is as clean as possible.
Great, thanks for that, Sasha. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through the Q&A.
It might be good to also mention that for folks, again, who might have joined a little bit late, this is our city plan to end homelessness. We have a parallel effort that is going on with our housing element update on the city end. And so for folks that might be especially interested in the physical building of affordable housing, where it goes, policies to incentivize that type of housing that you might be interested in. We have a housing element update process going on, and it has extensive community engagement efforts going along with it, kind of like what you're seeing here and what I just detailed before. So I encourage folks, for folks who are interested in that subject, I can encourage folks to go to the website, which I think has been popped into one of the answers of the Q&A. It's Engage Cupertino / housing element. And so I just wanted to mention that there, just in case there were some folks who might have missed that at the beginning of the presentation.
I'm seeing a question about what is the City of Cupertino planning to do with the information that you're compiling? So I'll answer that on the reporting end, and then maybe Gabe can talk about the goals for the plan and how that'll affect strategy. So as we've gone over a couple of times, we are seeking feedback in a variety of forms. There is this community meeting. We'll have also Stakeholder Survey. We're meeting with folks with different perspectives, from healthcare to education to legal services, developers, since homelessness is an intersectional issue in the community. We really want to hear as many perspectives as we can. And then the process for distilling that is looking at the major themes that come out of all of these meetings and all of the surveys and folks, the interviews that we're doing with folks. What are the most salient recommendations? And also we're doing data analysis and looking into who is experiencing homelessness in the community based on the records in the shared data system, where folks' outcomes and services are tracked in the community. So looking at, who's coming into homelessness, evaluating the efforts that the city is making and that nonprofits are making, the housing opportunities that are available, and thinking about what are the most common recommendations that are coming out of all of these stakeholder meetings. What looks like it's most important to folks? Everyone so far is talking about, housing development, which is super great because the city has, as we mentioned several times, the housing element. So there's a lot of great work already underway on that front that we can highlight. But what are some of the biggest concerns that are coming up in every single meeting, and really reflecting the things that folks are raising again and again in this process?
I think that summed it up nicely. Thank you, Sasha. We have some more questions, Jesse?
Yes, we had a question about, someone was curious what prompted the city to put this program together, and curious sort of what the origins were for it.
I can take that one on. I don't know if maybe if you'd like, Sasha, we can pull it back to the presentation and just go back to that slide. But in general, we had the release of the 2020 to 2025 Santa Clara County plan to end homelessness, or community plan to end homelessness. And once that was launched and released, the Cupertino City Council formally adopted the plan and was the first in Santa Clara County to do so. And once that was done, the City Council decided to prioritize this in the city's work program this fiscal year. So this fiscal year that we're in right now, fiscal years are what the city operates in, and this is the 2021 to 2022 fiscal year, and that ends in June of 2022, and then we'll go into 2022, 2023. So that's where the origin came from. And so once that was prioritized in the work program, it was staff's responsibility essentially to make this happen. And so now we've gone through the first part of the process, which is launching it and doing an RFP process and selecting Homebase. And now we're in the community engagement part. And then we'll end this spring, we'll go into drafting the plan. And then in the summer, we'll go to hopefully recommending and then formally adopting the plan with the Housing Commission and the City Council.
Great, thanks, Gabe. We got a question about what obstacles are in the way of barring landlords from charging rents above a determined ceiling. So I can take that one. Recently, back in October, the governor signed California Assembly Bill 1482, the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. The bill took effect in January of 2020. It includes an annual rent increase caps of 5% plus inflation or 10%, whichever it is lower. We've got another one that has come in about wondering what is the county's progress on implementing the 2020-2025 county plan to end homelessness. That's another one that I'm happy to take unless other folks want to chime in on.
I can get us started.
Great, thanks, Sasha.
Yeah. So I know that we mentioned some really big goals earlier. One of the county plan's goals is to house 20,000 people within this 5-year period. So as of December 31st, 2021, the county is 30% of the way to that goal. So if our goal is to house 20,000 people by 2025, there have been just shy of 6,000 housing placements since January 2020.
Great, thanks, Sasha. Let's see, what other questions we have here? We also have a question about what is the city doing for those with mental health or substance abuse issues? Again, I'm happy to take that unless someone else wants to chime in.
Feel free to start us off, Jesse, and then I can chime in if I think of anything.
Sure, I'm gonna throw something in the Q&A so folks have a link, but there are sort of a wide variety of services that the county's behavioral health services department provides, substance abuse and mental health services for the public. So I'll put that, I will put that link in the chat so folks have that information available.
And it's good to know that the West Valley Services of the world that provide services to homeless residents in Cupertino, that is part of their work. So when there's a case management session that might be happening with someone and they may express mental health issues or maybe substance abuse issues, the West Valleys of the world, that's part of the protocol is to connect folks with services. So with those county services or the services that might be appropriate to them. So it's not like just that those county services operate in a vacuum. We also make sure that our operators, our nonprofits, make sure to connect their clients to those services as well.
Great, thanks so much, Gabe. Also got a follow-up question about the county goal. Mm-hmm. The question was about whether that was 20,000 additional homes or something else.
Yeah, so the county plan to end homelessness goal that we were talking about, that was housing people. So that was finding units for 20,000 people by 2025. But I do want to come back to Measure A though. So the affordable housing bond. And so that's the 950 million affordable housing bond. And the goal of that bond is to create to create or preserve about 5,000, just shy of 5,000 affordable housing units. So, the county plan is about getting people housed. It's also about creating new housing opportunities, and it's about what can we do while folks are unsheltered to support their quality of life up until the moment they get housed. And how do we stem the tide into homelessness to begin with? How do we prevent folks from becoming homeless?
Great. Thanks, Sasha. Let's see. Let's see what other questions we have. Sorry about that. We also had some questions about the city's plan to build more housing. So I'm going to pop a couple of links into the chat with some more information on that. But Gabe, if you wanted to speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think just going back to my previous comment about the city's housing element, that's probably the appropriate avenue for folks to not only learn this city's current efforts to build our housing in general, but also to include your feedback into the future of building housing in Cupertino. So I'd encourage folks to visit the. I do think it's important to mention is that we have the city has a below market rate program as well for folks that are interested in affordable housing in Cupertino. So we can share that link in the Q&A. But also, if you go to the city's website and go to housing, the below market rate option for both rental and home ownership opportunities is there as well. So I know that's not this specific part of the question, but I figure folks might be interested in checking that out too, because that's a great resource that Cupertino offers as well.
Great, thanks so much for that. We've also gotten a few questions in the chat about whether the slides were going to be made available for folks and whether there's a link for updates on the planning process. So we'll share that link again in the chat. But there is a city website where you'll be able to access those slides and where folks will be able to see updates on the planning process, including all of the different ways that folks shared today about how to stay involved in the process. I think that might be all the time we have for questions.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jesse, for keeping track of those and for bringing them to our attention throughout the process today. And thank you, everyone, for your input. I am going to go back to our last closing out slide. We really encourage you to access the City Plan to End Homelessness website. to sign up for announcements for future opportunities to get involved, as Gabe highlighted and Mark touched on also. We really want to see folks' feedback once we get to plan drafting after our focus groups and our survey. There will be an opportunity for everyone to comment on the draft plan, and that'll be posted on the City Plan website. So sign up for email announcements on the website. And if you have any questions throughout the process, do feel free to reach out to the Homebase team at Cupertino at homebasecccc.org. And again, thank you so much for coming today, for being open to learning about the multifaceted issue of homelessness in the community, thank you for asking the tough questions. And most of all, thank you for all of your insights and your ideas about what you want to see in the plan to end homelessness in Cupertino. So with that, we will bid you good evening, and thanks again for your interest and your ideas today.